food can be extremely powerful. It can either set the foundation for health or it can set the foundation for disease.
Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to wherever you're joining from around the world. It's a great honor for me to host you all here from our quarantine headquarters here in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining our timely response series for parents, teachers, and caregivers. My name is Samir Mansour. I'm the CEO and founder of No Limit Gen. We at No Limit Gen realize that not everyone has access to the world's leading child well-being professionals, and oftentimes when we need it the most. So our mission here is to bring the professionals to you. In this way, we can create the supportive environments for children to heal, rise, and thrive into their full potential. On our website, www.nolimitgen.org, you can find practical child well-being training videos on many timely topics, everything from children's mental health, protection, and well-being to fun mindfulness activities. Take a look, and if you think your colleagues will be interested in these content as well, please feel free to share it with them. We'd be happy to have them on our platform. Finally, all our content and programming is made possible with your generous support, so please consider a donation through our website so we can continue to support you with this excellent programming. So now on to the show. When I first saw the stats, I wondered, wait, is this correct? Because according to the USDA, there are over 14 million families in the United States right now who are food insecure. This number has no doubt risen over the last couple of months. And according to the CDC, healthy eating in childhood, adolescence, and really for anyone, is important for proper growth, development, and prevention of various health conditions in children. We also know there's a direct connection between healthy diet and nutrition and mental health. For example, preschool and school-age children who are food insecure are more likely to suffer from challenges like anxiety, and elementary school children who experience severe food insecurity are 4 times more likely than their peers to require mental health counseling. We can help prevent this by making adjustments to all of our nutritional intakes. So today, our featured guest, clinical nutritionist, Dr. Lara Zakaria, will talk us through the factors that shape our food decisions and how we can both adopt, reinforce healthy habits at home, school, and the community. And with that, I'll introduce today's featured speaker. This is actually the second time I've had the pleasure of having Lara on our platform. The first time was in creating nutritional series for children in crisis and armed conflict environments. I know her to be a great humanitarian and someone with a generous heart and incredibly well-informed background. So it's a pleasure for us to have you here on our show today, Lara Zakaria. So Lara is a functional pharmacist and clinical nutritionalist, a graduate of the Earnest Mario School of Pharmacy at Rutgers University. She spent 20 years in community pharmacy practice. After developing an interest in nutrition, she earned an MS in nutrition from the University of Bridgeport and subsequently qualified as a certified nutritional specialist. Lara is also a certified practitioner of the Institute for Functional Medicine. Lara currently supervises a professional mentorship program for nutrition and functional medicine. She is the co-owner of Pharmacy Evolutions, an integrated medicine education platform and consulting group focused on professional development for pharmacists. Lara is also an adjunct professor of nutritional biochemistry at the University of Bridgeport. She is passionate about prevention and the reversal of metabolic and autoimmune disease and working with nutrition and pharmacy professionals to leverage their unique expertise to optimize patient, medical, and nutritional programs. Lara, it's such an honor for us to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And this is such an important topic in the integrative community when we talk about the intersection of health and nutrition. We don't often have enough of a chance to talk about how that applies to food insecurity and in certain populations that may not have ready access. So this is a very welcome conversation.
Absolutely. I know many of our audience members here today are so excited to have you on. So let's dive right in, Lara, because we have a lot to cover today. And let's start with this. You know, back in March, we saw these long lines and overflowing shopping carts at grocery stores. We're now starting to slowly see things return to a sense of normalcy. What have you observed about the current situation, and how has it impacted our eating habits and our buying decisions around food? And I'll ask the audience as well, because I'd be curious to get your observations. What changes have you observed in eating habits at this time? Go ahead, Lara.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember so I'm in New York City, and I remember when the announcement around the fact that we had to shift to sheltering at home and start thinking about planning ahead, and everybody was rushing to the grocery stores and the shelves were bare, and everybody of course remembers, the toilet paper being out of stock. But what was consistent throughout that in most experiences was the shelves of non-perishables was depleted. You couldn't get rice, you couldn't get beans, you couldn't get canned or dried to save your life. And everybody was thinking about the potential possibility of not being able to have access to food generally, right? Like if we had to shut down farms, and if we couldn't get transportation to bring food from, farming areas to grocery stores, et cetera. And so I think since then, the situation has calmed down. A lot of stores started instituting policies to help support during COVID. The one thing I found to be consistent is that regardless, whether it was back in February, March, or now in May, the produce aisle is still stocked to the max. And I'm not seeing the depletion on the shelves. I still go to the shelves and it's still not quite as full when I go to the aisles. But looking at the produce aisle, everything is in stock, and you can get organic, you can get, conventionally raised produce. So it begs the question, first of all, I'm grateful, so grateful to our farmers, our workers, our truck drivers, our delivery and distribution centers for being able to keep that supply there. But it begs the question, are we really leveraging probably the most powerful tool that we have in our toolkit to preserve and promote health? Are we fully leveraging that? And where are the shortcomings coming from? Is it a lack of knowledge? Is it a lack of access? Is it a financial issue? And so understanding where those breaks are can help us to maybe bridge that gap and really leverage that to promote better health, especially right now.
Absolutely. And, in your work, you talk about there being three important factors that shape the choices that we make around food. And these factors can be either barriers to a healthy diet, or they can be an opportunity to improve our diet. And I found these three variables to be very fascinating. And it made me question also myself, perhaps, if I look into these variables in my own life, I can see a lot of where I've been making my food decisions from as well. So can you walk us through what these three factors are and how they impact the decisions we make around food?
Yeah, absolutely. So the three are education or cultural barriers, the physical access to food, and then behavioral and emotional patterns. So what does that mean? So educational or cultural barriers. We've all grew up around a certain type of thinking and how we relate to food, right? Most of us know that fruits and vegetables are good for you. That's usually pretty common knowledge. But how we use those, or how we interpret them, how we pull them into our day-to-day life changes. So some of us that grew up maybe in more ethnic homes looked at fruits and vegetables and how they related to home cooking, how they related to what maybe mom taught us what to make and what to do with them. And that might stop there. For some of us, maybe we're interested in nutrition, and so we might be, on Google and looking at various different nutritional values of food. And for others, it's just basically, something that we just quickly grab and go, and it doesn't really take a lot of thought for us to make a decision about what to eat. So the first barrier is understanding and leveraging the power of food. And I find a lot of people don't understand that food can be extremely powerful. It can either set the foundation for health, or it can set the foundation for disease. And how you make those choices, which items you use most often, those are going to be what make that determination. So let's take diabetes, for example. Folks don't realize that even if you have a family history of diabetes, that doesn't mean you can't prevent yourself from getting diabetes. And it has to do with what you may have learned. So if in your family you're used to eating a certain way, maybe you eat a lot of processed food, your breakfast tends to be processed cereals, you do a lot of things like pancakes or waffles or Pop-Tarts or something like that, then you're probably sort of been culturally ingrained to eat in a way that might contribute to diabetes. So the question is it genetic or is it habit in that case? Right? And that brings me to that third piece that I said, behavior and habit. How many of us don't really know why we do what we do? I have a funny story. I had a roommate in college who used to shake her milk before she poured it out. And she would pull it out of the refrigerator, she'd shake it, and then she'd pour it. And I asked her one day, like, why do you shake your milk? Like, is there something I don't know? And she said to me, she says, I don't know, my mom always did it, so I sort of just started doing it. And so we call up her mom, we're like, hey mom, why do you shake your milk? And she goes, I don't know, my mom used to do it, so I just do it. And till this day, we don't actually know why great-grandma started shaking her milk. Maybe it was because the way that milk came, when you'd have the milk delivery come, maybe it separated, and so maybe they got in the habit of shaking it. But it's just such a great example of how we often have these habits passed down to us, and we don't question them. They're just a part of what we do and who we are. And until we start to question them, we start to realize maybe they're habits that were taken on for the wrong reason. Maybe they became part of our emotional eating habits. Maybe they're customs that remind us of home, and they're really ground us in where we come from and who raised us, and it makes us feel nurtured. And sometimes those habits are fantastic. I learned how to ferment vegetables from my grandmother, for example, and fermented vegetables are fantastic for immune health and gut health. So that's a great habit that I learned. But I also learned to maybe overindulge in sweets when I have them in front of me, and maybe I'm a little stressed. So that's not a great emotional eating pattern either. So being able to distinguish those and really pull them apart and understand why we do them is a great step in understanding how to break those bad habits. And then third is access to food. And access to food can be physical. It could be being in a place where you literally cannot go and get the food. Example right now might be the elderly who might be afraid to go out to the grocery store because they're worried that they might catch COVID. And so they might be sheltering in place and might be relying on either food delivery services or neighbors or family members to bring groceries to them. But that is a barrier to access. We also think about food deserts. In the United States, there are too many communities that don't actually have access to produce and don't actually have access to good grocery stores. A lot of communities, New York comes to mind as a great example, their closest access to food is either fast food or it might be like a bodega that might have very limited fresh food and might be more stocked up on canned items, for example, or convenience items. And then third is financial access. Unfortunately, often access to healthy food means a higher price tag. And for communities and families that might be limited on income, it might preclude them from being able to get the healthier item. In time of COVID now, we're seeing the rates of unemployment rise drastically. A lot of families that might have been on the border of food security 2-3 months ago might be finding themselves tipping over into food insecurity at this time. And I think that accounts to that figure that you talked about earlier. And so many of these families, and I think these are a great opportunity to educate about options for food security, about local and state and even federal programs that might be available, because they might not have had to look into those options before, and this might be the time for them to be educated and take advantage. Experts have told me that the biggest issue is not necessarily the lack of funding or the lack of available programs, but rather that the lack of education that they're actually out there, that there is something to help and how to leverage it and how to maximize it for health. And that's where I feel like my integrative approach comes in. Okay, now that you've found access, how do we maximize it for healthy decisions?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that overview, because, if we know what is informing our decisions, in this case, education, culture, access to food, or our behaviors and emotions. Some of them might be completely irrational, like shaking milk. I'm sure there was a great reason for that back in the day, which is lost upon us now. But when we know what these factors are that are influencing us, we can then begin to change. And healthy exercise might even be, like listing out what are the ways that I've been trained around food, and seeing where those might actually not resonate with reality, and doing that with emotion or our existing behaviors. So, following that line of emotion and behavior, this is a great period of adjustment, and adjustments bring with it its own sense of challenges that can impact our mood. So recently I read an article in the New York Times that talked about the surge and increase of processed foods, and they called it cravings for foods of nostalgia, which was an interesting way of phrasing it because nostalgia is linked to emotion. So how does our emotional state impact the food choices we make and our behaviors around food?
It doesn't just impact it, it is it. We think of food, I think, logically. We think food is important for sustenance. It's important for, we literally can't survive without food. We have to eat, right? And then there's the piece of it that I would argue we don't only have to eat to live. We have to make the right choices when we eat in order to thrive, not just to survive another day on this planet. But our eating decisions are made by emotion almost exclusively. They're based not just on the decision that you want to be healthy, they're based on the emotional connection you have to health. What does that health mean to you? Does it mean more time with your kids or grandkids? Does it mean being more productive at work? Does it mean having better athletic ability, right? It's the desire for that outcome that really drives your decision to make that food choice. So the same can be done in a negative way. And I would argue that most of us, when we're not aware, now we all now become aware that we make emotional decisions, so hopefully we'll make better decisions moving forward. But for most of us, if you're not aware of that emotional component, you're making decisions out of stress, out of sadness, out of anxiety, or out of happiness, out of celebration. How often do we say, I deserve this cupcake, I earned it, I had a rough day, I earned some ice cream? And so our decisions don't always need to be because, A equals B and we need to eat. Often food is what helps to frame an emotion for us or helps us to connect with other people. Every single culture, what do you do when you visit? There's tea, there's coffee, there's biscuits, there's cookies, there's sandwiches. Collectively, we do things around food. And in fact, I challenge you, if you're doing a fast, to find something to do with a friend without eating. It's really hard. It's very challenging. I think Muslims, we all know that, during Ramadan, other than being very tired and dehydrated during the day, it's challenging to get together until it becomes time to eat, right? And so I think that's a very good example if you've experienced that kind of fasting. It's very hard to get together when you don't have that thing that's centrally binding you. We celebrate with food, we mourn with food. It's such a big part of our emotional habits. So during COVID, a lot of us are very stressed out. Parents are homeschooling and maybe trying to keep up with a new work schedule because now all of a sudden their work has converted to online, or maybe they're out of work right now, so they're stressed about finances on top of that. A lot of folks are worried or nervous about loved ones who might have gotten sick, or they're worried about them getting sick, or they're worried about themselves and their own health and how they fit into this, or what the potential is going to be, whether it be the economic impact of COVID or the health impact of COVID. All of us are sort of in that same space where the level of anxiety is increased. And so if you're used to medicating with food, what's the automatic thing that you're going to do? You're going to go to those foods that remind you of home, that remind you of comfort, that take you back to a time where you felt relaxed. So seeing a lot of people gravitating towards comfort foods. I'm seeing a lot of people gravitating towards snack foods. With people being home more and a lot of us having increased screen time, I'm finding also people kind of resorting to mindless eating. Having a snack bag open, a jar of nuts handy, just something that they can grab quickly and they're grazing throughout the day, not necessarily focused on what they're eating. And I'm not I can get into a whole other soapbox on how important it is to be physically present and mindful while you're eating, and the repercussions to the digestive system if you don't. But the point is that most of us sort of go to those habits that we have. We have our comfort food, we have our snacks that we go to, we have our stress foods. And again, going back to that idea of dismantling and being able to pull apart why you're doing what you're doing and address the emotional need underneath it, that's the way to stop it. Trying to push it away or shame it, that's not going to help. It's just going to come back even stronger, because now the stress of that is going to be additive, right? So being able to dismantle it, and as a family, even being able to have a conversation about it, I think is really important.
Absolutely. And that's very helpful. I think a question we can all ask, oftentimes as we go for that, fridge door open, maybe the 20th time in the day, is, am I feeding my emotion right now, or am I feeding my body and my health right now?
Yeah.
Right? Because there is a difference. And when you actually check in with yourself, and I've done this with myself, where I've checked in and it comes back, your body knows, your body will be honest with you. It's like, no, I'm actually not hungry. It just, I'm going for the taste. And really, when you're going for the taste, you're going for the comfort, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's like, I tell my clients, are you hungry here or are you hungry here? What are you trying to feed?
So, Lara, before we get into what steps we can take to better make decisions for ourselves and our families, let's address the foundations of a well-balanced diet and the benefits of adopting such a diet. Can you talk us through that?
Absolutely. So I'm going to give you the Nutrition 101 super abbreviated primer so that we're all on the same page, because I realize we have a lot of different folks from different walks of life here with us. So we're going to do this. This is a quick 2-cent introduction. So I think of that foundational piece of nutrition in 3 pieces. One is, are you getting adequate what's called macronutrients? 2, are you getting adequate micronutrients? And 3, are you getting adequate phytonutrients? So what are those 3 things? 1, macronutrients. Well, people might have heard the phrase, you track your macros, or I'm trying to watch my macros. Macros refer to, as the term macro implies, large nutritional compounds. So that's your fat, your carbohydrates, and your proteins. Now, the body takes those, breaks it down into smaller compounds, but essentially having the right balance of those 3 is what we want to aim for. So when we talk about you're eating too many carbohydrates, you're not getting enough healthy fats, you're getting the wrong kinds of fats, you're not getting enough protein, you're eating too much protein, we're talking about balancing the macros. And I want to dismantle one misconception that there is one good macro, or there's a bad macro or anything like that. All 3 macros are essential. It's the quality of that macronutrient that is important, and the balance of each other. And different people, depending on their age, their situation, other conditions that they're dealing with, their time in life, how stressed they are, how much they're exercising, your target macros are going to vary by multiple factors. So there is not one perfect diet. There's not one perfect goal to reach for that. Every person has a slight variation that helps them to optimize their health wherever they're at. So that's level 1. Level 2 are your micronutrients. So micro meaning smaller. These are smaller compounds. So these are your vitamins and your minerals. So this is like your vitamin C. Are you getting adequate magnesium? Do you have enough zinc in your diet? Do you need to supplement vitamin D? So these are your micronutrients. These are found in most foods. They're found in varying degrees. And this is part of the reason we need to diversify what we eat. Evolutionarily, humans thrived when they were able to get a variety of foods in. That's because we maximized on the sources of these micronutrients in particular. And so certain foods are going to be high in certain things than others. Example that comes to mind are animal products tend to be higher in B vitamins, and particularly B12, for example. So often we find that folks who are on a vegetarian diet might be deficient in B12 because it's challenging to get enough from a vegetarian diet if you're not eating animal products. And so we have to supplement in those cases. In other cases, we see folks who maybe not eating enough of a diverse diet. Maybe they don't eat enough fruits and vegetables. And so some of their minerals and vitamins that are particularly rich in those produce and those fresh foods might be depleted. Folks who tend to eat a lot of processed foods tend to also lose out on a lot of nutrients, because in the food processing, when you turn something into something else, or you change the shape of something, if there is and typically there is some sort of high heat process or some sort of mechanical process, in those processes you often lose some of those nutrients. And in fact, you also change some of the structure of the macronutrients. So that is part of the reason why processed food is something that we want to minimize or avoid to optimize health. And this is a big part of the reason that I'm so heavily focusing on increasing the intake of fresh foods, of fresh produce, fruits and vegetables, because in their fresh form, in frozen too, frozen isn't bad either, if that's the best option that you have, that's how you maximize these nutrients in their whole form. And one thing I forgot to highlight and mention, and it's extremely important, is in terms of carbohydrates, fiber. Fiber has been over and over and over linked to improvements in chronic disease and obesity. As a general rule, Americans do not eat even close to enough fiber. Like, the bar is pretty low. I think we actually need to go probably double what the recommendation is to really optimize health. But even at that lower bar, the majority of Americans are not meeting that minimum. And fiber is an essential piece, because not only does it help balance blood sugar, it also helps to make us feel more full and satisfied after meals, but it also helps to feed our microbiome, which is the balance of our good bacteria to bad bacteria. And in the past decade, the research has skyrocketed on the effects of the microbiome on, I don't think I'm exaggerating if I say, almost every health condition and every health outcome. It manages everything. And we're also learning that the food that we eat, fresh food that we eat, actually communicates via the microbiome and via our DNA to help optimize our health. So it's essential that that food be live, that it be fresh, that it be whole. And so beyond the processing that I talked about before, the depletion of the nutrients, processed food doesn't confer that same communication. It doesn't help us optimize these patterns that we've evolved to be able to use and leverage for health. And then the third piece sort of ties into that, and that's the phytonutrients. Phytonutrients are what give food color. So the reason raspberries have that particular hue of red, the reason blueberries have that particular hue of blue, why cacao, real authentic chocolate, has that particular dark brown, almost black color, teas, why they have their different shades, that's all because of the phytonutrient properties that those foods have. The combinations of the different phytochemicals, and there's hundreds if not thousands of them, we haven't completely finished elucidating all of them. But the combinations of those colors, just like a paint palette where you combine colors and it creates a new color, that's what creates those unique colors. And that's why we talk about eating the rainbow. Because the more diversity in color you get, the more diversity of these phytonutrients that you get. And these phytonutrients are part of that communication cascade. And in the field of epigenetics, we're finding out that this is where the intersection of genetics and environment comes in. Being able to leverage these phytonutrients to talk to our genetic makeup helps us to optimize our health. And in fact, researchers are finding you can actually leverage phytonutrients when they're concentrated, when we're getting them readily from our diet, or sometimes in supplement form, you can concentrate them and take them as supplements. They really help to optimize health, and they can even reverse disease, which is a powerful statement and has some powerful potential if we can really learn how to harness that. So that's to be continued. But essentially, this is, again, why I'm so focused on increasing whole foods in our diets and increasing fruits and vegetables. And it tends to be our most vulnerable populations, and particularly our children, who probably need it the most, have a hard time meeting these goals. The My Plate recommendations are a minimum of 5 fruits and vegetables a day. That's a minimum. Again, the bar is set pretty low. In order to optimize health, we have to go above that, actually. And if we can't even meet the minimum on the low end of the range, how are we going to adequately prevent disease? How are we going to keep these families safe? How are we going to prevent obesity and heart disease, diabetes, allergic disease, asthma? And again, these are issues that are very closely tied to those most vulnerable populations, which the fear and concern post-COVID, if we cannot address and access these families, we have a very large, scary potential that we're going to have even more communities at risk for developing chronic disease. And that's not only a burden on those communities, but it's a burden on the healthcare system and on our economy as well.
Lara, that was such an incredible overview of everything, and I don't know how you managed to fit that all in a few minutes, but you did, and that was very helpful. And we talk about epigenetics, which is of course the role in genes transmitting to the child, and a lot of the previous behaviors or genetic dispositions appearing in that child. And we talk about the influence of parents or guardians in the child's life. You know, we know that they are the most influential role models in the children's lives, and that we can sometimes unknowingly pass down unhealthy habits to our kids. So perhaps there's an opportunity here to break that cycle and make wiser family decisions around food. So if you can help equip parents with a game plan that'll inspire their kids to eat healthier, because oftentimes we need a little bit of creative maneuvering with the children to get them to eat a little healthier, what might you share with them?
Absolutely. I'm actually going to share my screen for a couple of bullet points that might be helpful for folks to follow along with.
Great.
Hopefully this makes sense. Pardon me while I figure out my technology. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep, it's showing up beautifully.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so trying to tie together now everything that we said. We started talking about some of the barriers, the 3 barriers to access and to decision-making: education, cultural values, access, and emotional eating patterns. Part of it, when we talk about children, we're always talking about parents in the household, right? And understanding that what we do as parents translates directly to how our kids will process the information and then how they mirror that habit, right? The milkshaking. She didn't even think about it. She just does it, right? She never even questioned why. It's just what we do. So understanding that in order to improve our children's health and choices, we have to mirror to them the behavior we want them to make. So first and foremost is understanding your own behavior and what you're doing for your own health, and showing that you're taking steps to improve your health so that you serve as a role model. And that doesn't just include, eating vegetables in front of them, although it definitely can and should, but it also includes investigating, learning, finding educational opportunities, sharing with them educational opportunities that are age appropriate, right? Using child education tools, games, books, programs, etc., that can help to instill that knowledge with them, and that you can have then a conversation, again, that's age appropriate and that meets them at their level. And then it shows them that you put value in it, so that's mirroring to them that they should put value in it. It creates a culture from the family perspective that health, wellness, and food choices are part of who we are. And so it starts to reprogram the script about what is nostalgia. So then when they are parents and they're stressed, they're remembering, hey, during COVID, my mom really sat down and did a lot of research around nutrition. And that changes the impact on how I'm going to deal with stress now. Maybe that's not top of mind, but it's sort of what's working in the background as they're making their own decisions later in life. So that's one, mirroring. 2, avoiding mindless eating, minimizing screen time. I think there's this meme going around talking about how like screen time, like hours have just gone out the window. It's 1 o'clock at any time. And so really rethinking these behaviors, and it's completely normal, especially when we're first adjusting, to sort of look at it like, okay, this is different and we got to figure it out. And, that might mean that some of our traditional rules go out the window. But at some point, now we're getting into month 3 in some states where we've been sheltering in place and we've had social distancing measures in order. At what point do you change that, right? And at what point do you start realizing that you've actually built new habits? And now you've got to unprogram habits that you've made because of this shift in lifestyle. And how quickly can we've fallen off the bandwagon, get back on, and making decisions then to be very mindful about how we use our screen time and how we then make decisions about that mindless eating. So, maybe changing the kind of snacks that you have on hand, right? Snacks that are processed, sweet, salty, those are made to make you eat more. There's a reason you can't just have one, right? It's been made so that you can't have just one. It's made for you to binge eat it, right? Because the more you binge eat, the more they sell. And that's great for their bottom line, but not necessarily great for your waistline or for your health in general, right? So making decisions when you go to the store to buy foods that are healthier and snack options that are not necessarily predicated on just continued eating and mindless eating. Minimizing screen time, and then shifting over to doing activities that use your hands up. So if I'm sitting watching a TV show on Netflixing, I'm, scrolling through Instagram or Facebook, it's really easy for me to just mindlessly eat as I'm doing this activity that's occupying my mind. So doing activities that use your hands, parent-child spa days where you're doing mani-pedis or, applying face masks or, any of those, kind of fun rituals. Games and puzzles. Puzzles are a great distraction because they require concentration. They're very meditative in a way, and they require hands. You can't really snack and use a puzzle. You're going to get salt and grease all over the puzzle pieces first, and second, you need your hands to be really active. Doing physical activities, biking, walking with your family, taking time out to actually be outside, especially as the weather is improving. Get outdoors and, of course, follow proper social distancing measures and safety precautions, but get outside, get some fresh air, get some sunlight, and most importantly, get away from the kitchen. Right? Do something physical. And then just thinking about different activities that you can do that might involve just fun playtime that, again, are just a distraction away from mindless eating. Shifting over to when you do eat, it's a meal time or a snack time. You sit and you eat. You are focused on the food. You are enjoying the food, preferably you're enjoying the company of your family as well, and really trying to reset the habit away from mindless eating and distraction to a purposeful, mindful activity.
So it's almost like creating these rituals around the food for food specific times. And, we were talking a couple of days ago, and you'd mentioned some very interesting activities that we can do with children that can introduce these foods to them much earlier in their life, right? So getting them involved because that multiple exposures to their interest and getting them involved in the whole, food curation process, whether it's going to the grocery store together, whether it's, gardening together, but there are a number of activities that you talked about that I found very helpful. Would you mind sharing some of those with the group here today?
Absolutely. And I have another slide for you.
Oh, wow. You're prepared.
Hopefully you can see the slide as well. Yep. Okay. So the big thing I usually get, and the obstacle that I hear from parents is that, I can't get my kid to eat this. They don't like XYZ. I've tried introducing whatever it is, broccoli or whatever, and they just hate it. They won't eat it. So you have to, this is, again, this justifies its own conversation of the psychology of food, particularly the psychology of children's behaviors around food and their developmental needs. But just some simple strategies to sort of leverage that piece. Children usually are motivated by their own involvement. So when we try to present them with something that they had no part in, they feel powerless to make a decision, they often will pump the brakes and try to regain control. So in order to get over that, you want to try to engage them as much as possible. So we usually see that when kids are involved in the food decision process and the food preparation process, they're usually much more invested in that food. For example, thinking about maybe if you have the space to do it, whether it's a community garden or a backyard garden, or maybe you have the space in you have a smaller space and maybe having like a vertical garden in your home, introducing them to the concept of live food. Children really respond very well to that live behavior. There's a reason that we grow them in schools and help them. This is how they are introduced to the science of botany. So having them be involved in that process and really making the connection between food growing from the ground and it coming to the table and involving them in the process from tip to tail is really helpful, and it's fascinating for kids. It really gets them sort of excited to learn more and explore eating this food. It comes to mind, kids will literally pick things out of the garden and stick them in their mouth. Let's take advantage of that and maybe have them stick a vegetable in their mouth.
Yeah, it's exciting. They created this. They were involved in this. They see where it comes from.
I made this, and now I'm eating it. How cool is that? There's actually these great programs in New York that are these community garden, school garden types projects where the kids are involved in the gardening, and then they bring it into the kitchen and they serve it for lunch. So they're literally seeing the whole process. There was a disturbing statistic. I don't remember the exact number, but there was a disturbing statistic of the number of children that couldn't recognize produce or where it came from. They didn't know what broccoli looked like because they had not actually seen a broccoli as is. They see it maybe as a frozen food item or it's in their meal, but they couldn't recognize where it came from or that it grew or that it was a plant. And it wasn't just broccoli, it was generally produce in general. They don't understand that process. And if they're not exposed to the gardening aspect, then they may not realize the difference between, the pre-cut chicken nuggets and the tomato that's on their plate. And so I think this really helps them to learn in a way that engages all their senses. And they're just natural curiosity, right? Involving them in looking for new recipes, right? Like you want to try a new food. Hey, we're going to try this cool new food. Look at it. This is a very cool looking food. Maybe it's butternut squash, and let's play with it and look at it and admire the colors. Let's go explore and find recipes to make this. Go look on YouTube, show them recipes online and how online bloggers are using it. Use Pinterest, use Instagram. Let's actually use the internet for positive purposes, right? To instill in them a curiosity and have them be involved and make a choice with you about what they want to do with that food. Next, bring them shopping with you. I know it can be a burden, especially if you have multiple children trying to get them engaged. But think about, again, as age appropriate, having them make food choices, maybe make it part of the game. We're going to choose, each of you choose one new food that we're going to bring home. We're going to learn about it. We're going to find a recipe and we're going to make it this week. Involve them in the food preparation, again, as age appropriate. Young kids as young as 3 or 4 can be involved in the kitchen. They could be tearing lettuce. They could be helping you massage oil into kale and other leafy greens. Older kids that can handle a knife can help you chop. They can help you monitor a pot, watch it as it boils. There's always some activity they can do in the kitchen. So, again, it's very stressful, and I understand that having kids underfoot in the kitchen, especially if you have a smaller kitchen or smaller space, can be challenging. But think about ways that you can involve them in that process. And then what's really important is sitting down as a family to eat. Social research, nutrition research over and over shows that when families have a mealtime, that has a positive impact on everything from behavior to health outcomes. And again, going back to what we were talking about before, getting away from the mindless eating and being really mindful about what you're sitting down to eat, creating time around that, and then again, reestablishing cultural and family norms so that now the sit down, the time at dinner, the healthy meal, the admiring the food, the thanking people who cooked it, if you're a religious family, the spiritual piece of gratitude, whatever that manifests in, that resets then the habits and the cultural relation that we have long term, right? Make a game out of it. I have my younger children draw rainbows. Instead of keeping a diet diary like I might have an adult do, I might have them draw rainbows for me. And every day they draw me a rainbow of the different colors that they ate, and they get a star for every rainbow that they are able to do. And then I find the kids are asking. They're like, hey, Mom, last week I didn't have anything purple. Can we buy something purple this week? And so they're, again, excited about the prospect of adding to their diet and exploring new things. And that opens up the potential to have a conversation about that new food item and how to eat it. And then when you want to introduce a new food, particularly in younger children, exposure is essential. Small amounts placed as part of an option amongst food that they recognize can be helpful. A conversation about that food is helpful, and never hide it. There's this trend to sort of mix in food and hide it. That sets the foundation that there's something either shameful or wrong about it, or what they're doing in their decisions around their food, and that sets up bad eating patterns long term. So be very authentic, and if they don't want to eat it, don't force them. Again, sets up negative connotations around their food. Work with them and understand why they don't want to try it, and work with them around different pieces of it. A lot of times it's a power struggle. They're looking to own what they're putting in their mouth. A lot of times they had a negative experience in the past and they're worried about recreating it. And always know that it doesn't, if they won't eat broccoli, they won't eat broccoli. There are a ton of other vegetables to try. There's so many options out there. Again, get them involved in the process, help them decide what's the next food that they want to try. Make it a game, make it exciting, make it fun, and hopefully you'll have a better experience with them moving forward. Don't sort of sit on the thing and develop this negative, it's always a fight, it's always a struggle. Work it into other foods, use dips and dressings, obviously as healthy as possible, that can help them enjoy the food a little bit more. Work it into other meals, make it fun, create little pictures on their plate, things like that, I think really go a long way in terms of helping kids recondition and get away from the idea that, ew, vegetables are gross and yucky, and helps them to develop hopefully a better, more positive outlook on that food.
Lara, that was, I put a star and wrote this down because if I could tweet it out in this moment, I would have. But when you said children are motivated by their own involvement, that's such a key point that, oftentimes we how many times have we heard, eat your vegetables, we give the order to the child, right? And then we wonder why they have an unhealthy relationship with certain things because they're associating it with something that's not fun, right? It's not interesting. I've been told to do this, but if we involve them, that their involvement generates that interest from such an early age, that we can see them and we can trust them to make the healthy decisions for themselves once they know better, right? So that's such a key component, and making it involving is.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just want to add one piece to that. Beyond the psychology is also the physiology. Most of us aren't naturally born liking bitter foods. Most of us have a tendency, and in fact, it's evolutionarily what's helped us to survive, is seeking carbohydrates, seeking sweetness. And that's part of the reason kids love sweet foods. That's why they gravitate towards fruits versus vegetables.
That's so interesting.
That's why and so in order to develop, to like these more complex flavors, spices, herbs, bitters in certain vegetables, you need exposure. And it's actually been shown exposure as early as in the womb and going through to what mom eats and what's produced in her breast milk and the flavors that then translate over into her breast milk. Babies can pick that up, and that starts to set the stage for what they're accepting later. So that's one key component. As they get older, or if you've missed the boat on that at this point, as they get older, even as adults, exposure is key. Regular exposure, once or twice a week, to a new food was what eventually gets you to like it. I'm going to use myself as a perfect example. I was probably the only nutritionist in the world that doesn't like beets. And I had to train myself as an adult, fully in my 30s. I had to train myself to like beets because it wasn't a flavor profile I was used to. I would make it in different ways. I would eat it with different combinations, but it took me years, and I'm not exaggerating here, years to learn to like beets. And it's a learned behavior. And so again, exposure at an early age, but making it fun. And to your point, not attaching any shame or anger to it is really important in that sometimes protracted process.
And so moving on to the next question, before I do, I'd just like to, I think we can get in maybe one or two questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, please type it into the chat box. And as you do that, my question for you is, often there are many instances in which, unfortunately, parents might not be as involved in the child's life, or that all these kind of incredible guidance that you just provide to the parent, they just might not have the time or be aware. And, this is where social workers can come in, or teachers can come in as the extended social safety network of care for the child. And our audience is comprised of a lot of social workers and teachers here today. So what can they do? I mean, in addition to promoting all these helpful steps and sharing these with the parents, what could they do to ensure that the children who are in their care or in their periphery are getting the benefits of this kind of guidance that you're providing today?
Absolutely. So the first step, again, goes back to education. And so, just because you're a social worker or a teacher doesn't mean that you have this training in nutrition. So it may not feel comfortable initially to have that conversation. So I would say the first thing would be to educate and or partner with organizations, nutritionists, dietitians, et cetera, that are involved in this field, and partner with them to either develop a network or a list of resources that then you can share. I think that is probably the most useful first step. And I'm curious if anybody out there who is listening has developed something like that, if you wouldn't mind sharing that resource for others to also either leverage for their own communities or to leverage themselves and connect with you directly. And I cannot help but also think about, again, going back to access. As social workers and teachers, you guys have this powerful ability to tap into communities and know exactly what resources are missing. And so we can sit here and have this pie in the sky kind of ideology of what we want our families and our kids to do. But the realities of those barriers we talked about earlier are real. And so being able to identify those communities that have those barriers and then connecting with resources, whether they be government resources, things like SNAP and WIC programs, or they be nonprofits that are dedicated to alleviating these, tapping into programs that might be available. I have a friend that works in a lower income school district in New Jersey, and is telling me about their produce program, where they actually deliver, as part of their school meal program, they deliver fresh produce. And during COVID, when kids have been at home, what they've done is convert it to a meal kit's not the right word, but a produce box. And parents can come in once a week to pick up their box. Parents that don't need it or want to redonate it to other families can then get it redistributed into other people's distribution boxes. And that has been, for a lot of communities, I can speak specifically only to New York and New Jersey because that's where I am, but for a lot of communities, a lot of the decision on whether or not to close schools was around whether or not these kids had access to food. So they had to develop programs and partnerships in order to continue to feed these children and these families. Because again, going back to food insecurity issues and the economic downturn. So it's really important to sort of put within your scope, within whatever community you're at, whether it be high, low income, whatever it is, understand where the barriers are and plug into the network and plug into community programs and nonprofits that can help you either develop a program where one is needed, or to plug in a program when there are some available. I hear over and over from folks I've talked to, the issue doesn't tend to be lack of funding or lack of food. It's lack of getting the right people into the right program, and frankly, removing the shame from it. For a lot of families, there's this burden of shame that, I failed and I can't provide for my family, and maybe reframing it in a way that this is about optimizing health and not a shortcoming.
And that's an important point that, what I'm hearing is that the food options exist. What doesn't exist perhaps is the knowledge around what programs exist. But, for those who are thinking that fresh produce might be this, from Whole Foods might be the only healthy option, and this is, prices people out, there are options. There are community options that can help subsidize access to healthier options and produce.
Often, not always, often. There are definitely still food deserts, right? And that's important to remember. But can you, as a community organizer, maybe think about bringing a farmer's market into an area that doesn't have access, right? Can you organize around something like that? And are there groups that can help you coordinate that? And there are nonprofits that are dedicated to community sustained agriculture, CSAs, and farmers markets. And can you coordinate one in an area that needs it? So for example, here in New York City, there are tons of food deserts, and we've been able to do is leverage local farms and local organizations that coordinate with farmers and bring them into these communities. So on any given day of the week in various neighborhoods that would traditionally be in a food desert, there are options. And that typically brings down the cost significantly. And something that a lot of people don't realize is that usually food supplement programs often pay for produce. And in some states, they are also exploring ways to incentivize it further. So in New York, they're actually been exploring a program where you get added points for utilizing it for produce versus utilizing it for processed food. So there are, it takes some investigating and exploring, and from state to state, there's going to be variations. There's going to be regulatory matters. There's going to be funding issues in certain areas. Rural areas are going to have a different set of barriers than urban areas. But it is, again, if this is an area that you're interested in, find a community of like-minded professionals and experts, and find those organizations that are already doing the legwork and partner with them to implement.
Wonderful. And in a few moments, I'll share a couple of resources that we've pulled together as well that are open access. But one question that's come in, for children who maybe are already on the junk food bandwagon, and it's really tough to get them to realign towards the healthier food, and maybe certain behavior patterns have already set in. How can we gently nudge them into this direction of healthier food decisions?
Absolutely. So
are there special foods that you might that might be good for that transition?
Absolutely. So there's always good, better, best, right? There's the unfavorable option. There's a slightly better option. There's even better than that. And then there's the ideal scenario. So one is to understand you're not going to jump from bad to best overnight. If you're, chowing down on, cookies and ice cream every day, and that's become sort of the habit, you're not going to go to eating kale chips the next day, right? There's got to be a transition process, and being aware and being flexible and non-judgmental in that process wherever that you're at. I'm a big believer in what's called the crowding out approach. And so rather than thinking about taking something away right away, let's bring something in. So as you bring in more and more healthy habits, you have less and less time to resort to those unhealthy habits. So for example, if you've identified that let's go with that cookies and ice cream example, you notice you sit down, you start binge watching Netflix, and you're chowing down on the cookies and ice cream. Can you remove the screen time? Can you do a different activity for at least part of the time? Not completely abandon your Netflix binging, but can you minimize the amount of time? So rather than sitting for 4 hours, maybe you're only sitting for 2 and you're doing a different activity for those other 2. Can you maybe say, okay, I've got my ice cream in the fridge, but before I eat the ice cream, I need to make sure that I'm having a healthy, balanced meal before that I'm hydrating adequately throughout the day, that I am adding in fruit as an option. So have the ice cream in the freezer, but make sure you have the fruit available as well, right? Can you even just add fruit to your ice cream? It doesn't even have to be that complicated, right? Can you add fruit? Can you add some sort of healthy option to what you're already doing just to give it some additional nutritional value? It does not have to be all or nothing. And what I hope happens is that as you start making those behavioral changes, you're at the very least becoming more cognitive aware of the decision you're making, and then sort of can unravel, again, those barriers we talked about earlier, whether they be habits, whether it be stress eating, emotional eating, whether it be just that you don't know what to buy. And you can certainly start making moves in a better direction.
And so, like all things, behavior modification, it takes consistency, right? It won't happen overnight.
Absolutely.
And that transition is very important. So I think you mentioned earlier in your talk, you introduced, being able to introduce maybe like 1 or 2 vegetables a week, right? And introducing them to that diversity. And hopefully over time that becomes the majority of what they're taking in, but gradually bringing it in. And of course, role modeling as adults is super important because the kids are watching us as well. So what are we eating around them, or even what we're not eating when we're not around them, right? That could even be very important as well. So setting the tone yourself.
Absolutely. Walking the talk.
Yes. So a couple of resources that we found, if you go to kidshealth.org, they're wonderful recipe, nutrition sets, fun activities and games you can find there, and that's kidshealth.org. There's also choosemyplate.gov, again, wonderful recipes and activities you can do with children over there, and the benefits of nutrition as well. Harvard has Healthy Eating Plate, which again is a wonderful resource for you to tap into. These are all open source. So if you're looking for activities or recipes to follow along with what Lara Zakaria has mentioned here today, that would be a wonderful way to follow up on this conversation. So this video will be available for playback in about a week. Everybody here will get an email for it. We hope you will be able to review it or share it with family members or your colleagues who might benefit from this. And for additional resources on this topic, we have on our website at nolimitgen.org whole modules dedicated to how to respond to children's well-being needs, in addition to Laura's previous nutrition guidance that she's provided on our platform as well. So you can tap into that. But of course, if you'd like to get in touch with Lara, her incredible work, you can visit it at www.larazakaria.com. You can see how to get in touch with her. I know she works individually. She can also work with groups. And as you can see, very resourceful, very engaging to have as a personal coach or as a group instructor. We also love getting your feedback. So if you have any thoughts or feedback to share around this programming, feel free to tweet us, Facebook us, LinkedIn us, reach out to us in any way possible. We'd be happy to get in touch with you. And we are a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to keep this excellent programming open for all to access. So we'd be so grateful if you considered a donation through our website at www.nolimitgen.org. And a special thank you to those who helped organize this event, our events producer, Aijan, and Megan from Lara's team, and a special thank you to Lara Zakaria. And I wish everybody a wonderful weekend. Do you have any last words to the audience?
Just a big thank you to everybody who's on board. You guys are part of the solution if you're here listening and tuning in. A huge thank you to our educators and our social workers. You guys don't get enough credit for the incredible work that you do. It's appreciated, it's seen. Thank you so much for all of that. And Samir, a thank you to you for having me on and for helping facilitate this important conversation. Thank you for the work that you've been doing too.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. And thank you, Lara, for joining us.